not have come from real people. However, Psychophysiology accepted the article in 1990 and published it the following year. Our study was the first to evaluate Hervey Cleckley's speculation, described in The Mask of Sanity, that psychopaths have a central and deep-seated semantic affective disorder, in which the words have semantic meaning but little emotional depth or coloring. Most words have semantic, dictionary, and affective meaning, but the words of psychopaths are two-dimensional, having only dictionary meaning, making them an effective tool for glib and shallow persuasion, deception, and manipulation. In Without Conscience, I suggested that inner speech was influential in the development and operation of conscience. Emotionally charged thoughts, images, and internal dialogue give a bite to conscience, account for its robust control over behavior, and generate guilt and remorse for transgressions. For psychopaths, conscience is little more than an intellectual awareness of the rules others make. In the LD study, my students and I tested the hypothesis that psychopaths process and use all words as having few, if any, affective connotations. We recorded event-related brain potentials as offenders determined as rapidly as possible if a letter string flashed on a computer screen formed an actual word. The letter strings were words with emotional or neutral connotations and pronounceable non-words presented randomly in one session. Brain potentials in lexical decision tasks typically are speedy, measured in milliseconds following the presentation of the letter strings. Among the low psychopathy offenders, decisions, is it a word, were quicker to emotional than to neutral words, consistent with a general literature on lexical decision times. In sharp contrast, the decisions of the high psychopathy offenders were relatively slow and virtually the same for emotional and neutral words. The interpretation of this finding is that emotional words carry a lot of information that most people readily access, thus facilitating lexical decisions. However, psychopathic offenders were unable to access this information and therefore viewed emotional words as if they were neutral words. The group differences in brain potential responses recorded during the LD task were striking, and the reason for the skepticism about the data expressed by science. Brain potentials evoked during a cognitive task are complex. They provide an insight into the depth, duration, and pattern of brain activity in response to the task. For low psychopathy offenders, components of the brain potential responses typically observed in an LD task were larger and more prolonged to affective than neutral words. In sharp contrast, the brain potentials of high psychopathy offenders were short-lived and virtually the same for emotional and neutral words. The brain potential and decision time data painted the same picture of psychopathic language. We concluded that psychopathic offenders conceptualize and process words in a cursory, shallow manner, and do little more than make a lexical decision with few semantic, affective associations. Our LD study provided the first behavioral and electrocortical support for clinical impressions that psychopathic language lacks normal affect. The study, development of the PCL-R, and my meeting with Joanne in San Diego occurred at a time opportune for generating collaborative imaging research on psychopathy. Moreover, the Berlin Wall had fallen a year earlier, and the unification of East and West Germany took place in the year of our